There's a moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when someone checks their investment account and sees a number they've never seen before. Six figures, $100,000. And instead of feeling like they've won, they feel something closer to exhaustion, like they climbed a mountain only to realize the mountain was just the trailhead. Most people who build real wealth will tell you the same thing. The first 100,000 was the hardest. Not just hard, a different kind of hard. The kind that makes you question whether the whole game is even worth playing. But here's what almost nobody tells you before you start. The difficulty isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. And once you understand why, the entire landscape of money changes. Let's start with something most of us were never taught. Money, when it's invested, doesn't just grow, it multiplies itself. That's what compound interest really means. You earn a return not just on what you put in, but on every return you've already earned. The snowball doesn't just roll, it gets heavier as it rolls. At 10% annual returns, roughly what the S&P 500 has delivered on average over the past 50 years, $100,000 becomes $110,000 after year one. That's $10,000 you didn't work for. You didn't clock in. You didn't answer emails. The money just made more money. But here's the brutal part. To get that $10,000 of passive growth, you first have to have the 100,000. And for most people, getting there is the fight of their financial lives. Think about what $100,000 actually demands of a typical American. The median household income in the United States is around $80,000 a year. Sounds manageable, right? Except the average American saves somewhere between 3 and 5% of their income. On 80,000, that's maybe $3,000 to $4,000 a year going into savings. At that pace, with no investment returns at all, reaching $100,000 takes somewhere between 18 and 22 years. Nearly 2 decades. For a goal that the financial world treats like a starting line. And this is the trap that swallows millions of people whole. They're saving, they're being responsible, they're doing what they were told to do, but the numbers don't reward small savings the way they reward large ones. Not yet. This is what makes the first milestone uniquely cruel. When your balance is small, compounding barely shows up. You're essentially racing against time on foot while everyone with more money is riding. The math isn't rigged, but it does favor those who are already ahead. Charlie Munger, one of the greatest investors who ever lived, once said something almost shockingly blunt about this. He said, "The first 100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it." No polish, no comfort. Just the raw truth from someone who'd been there. What Munger understood, and what most financial advice dances around, is that the first 100,000 isn't just a number. It's a threshold. Before it, you're fighting gravity. After it, gravity starts working for you. Here's the most clarifying comparison in personal finance. If you're saving $500 a month and earning 10% annually, reaching that first 100,000 takes roughly 8.5 years. That's a long road. Steady, disciplined, but long. The second 100,000? About 4.5 years. Same contributions, same returns. But the compounding on your existing balance is now doing heavy lifting alongside your new savings. The snowball is finally big enough to feel its own momentum. And it keeps accelerating from there. This isn't hope, this is arithmetic. The same 10% return that gave you $10,000 on 100,000 gives you $50,000 on 500,000. More than many full-time salaries, generated passively while you sleep. So why do so few people actually get there? Because the early years of saving feel like pushing a boulder uphill in the dark. You can't see the momentum building. You can't feel the compounding. It's invisible, until suddenly, one day, it isn't. Look at the numbers that show where most Americans actually land. Vanguard's research found that the median 401k balance across all age groups was just $35,000, not $35,000 in a bad year. 35,000 as the midpoint. Half of all account holders have less than that. And for workers aged 55 to 64, people a decade from retirement, the median balance was still below $100,000. After decades in the workforce, after decades of contribution, the first milestone remains out of reach for the majority of Americans right up to the edge of retirement. Only about 14% of 401k participants contribute the maximum allowed amount in a given year. 14%, which means the vast majority are not even loading the most powerful vehicle available to them. This isn't a story about laziness, it's a story about structure, about what happens when wages don't grow but costs do, when healthcare, housing, and childcare consume the margin that saving requires. The boulder is real, and the hill is steep. But the story gets more complicated and more important when you zoom out. Wealth in America is not distributed like water finding its level. It pools dramatically. The bottom 50% of American households, half the country, collectively hold less than 3% of total household wealth. 3%. And wealth concentration has only deepened since the 1980s, with the top 10% now controlling more than 66 cents of every dollar of wealth in the country. This isn't just an economic footnote. It shapes who gets to experience compound growth in the first place. If you don't have the capital to invest, compounding doesn't work for you. It works against you, or it simply doesn't show up at all. And for many families, the structural barriers to building that initial capital run deeper than income alone. Black Americans are denied mortgages at nearly twice the rate of white Americans, which matters enormously because homeownership has historically been one of the primary ways American families build intergenerational wealth. The Federal Reserve's data on family net worth captures the scale of the gap. The median white family's net worth is roughly $188,000. The median black family's net worth is around $24,000. The median Hispanic family's around $36,000. These aren't just different starting lines, they're different tracks entirely. When we talk about who struggles to reach the first major financial milestone, we have to be honest. The struggle is not evenly distributed. Systemic barriers don't bend to personal discipline. The math of compounding is neutral, but access to it is not. And yet, and this is where the story turns, the mechanism itself is real, and it is available, and understanding it changes how you move through the world, even imperfectly, even late, even with less than ideal conditions. Because here is the thing about that first 100,000. Once you understand what it actually represents, not just a savings goal, but a tipping point, a threshold where the math shifts beneath your feet, you stop treating it like one goal among many. You treat it like a key. Researchers found that wealthier households save 30 to 40% of their income. Lower income households save 0 to 5%. The gap in savings rates compounds the gap in wealth, which compounds the gap in returns. It spirals in both directions, which means the intervention that matters most, the one with the highest return per dollar of sacrifice, is finding a way to increase your savings rate before compounding can save you. Not comfortable savings. Uncomfortable savings, the kind that requires you to want the future more than you want the present. This is where the emotional reality of the first milestone gets its teeth. Because saving aggressively when you're young means trading present pleasure for invisible future math. There's no dopamine hit for watching your balance inch toward 50,000. No celebration at 72,000. Just the slow, quiet accumulation of something that hasn't started feeling real yet. One thing that helps, practically and psychologically, is understanding that the invested dollar is not the same as the spent dollar. A dollar invested in your 20s at 10% becomes $45 by retirement. A dollar spent is just gone. This is not a guilt trip. It's a reframe, one that makes patience feel less like deprivation and more like delayed arrival. And if you're starting later or starting smaller, that doesn't disqualify you from the math. It changes the timeline. But the mechanism, money compounding on itself over time, does not care how old you are when you finally show up for it. It only cares that you showed up. The people who actually cross that first threshold often describe a quiet shift in how money feels. It stops feeling like something that controls them and starts feeling like something they're in relationship with. That's not metaphor. That's what happens when your money is large enough to noticeably grow on its own. You become a participant in a process, not just a victim of one. And the acceleration after that point isn't theoretical, it's felt. The second 100,000 arrives faster. The third, faster still. Not because you got smarter or worked harder, but because the base is bigger. Because the snowball is heavier. Because compounding has finally built enough surface area to matter. So let's come back to where we started. That quiet moment, someone checking their account and seeing six figures for the very first time, the exhaustion on their face, the sense that the celebration should feel bigger than it does. Here's what they may not know yet. That feeling of anticlimax is the threshold speaking. What looks like a finish line is actually the moment the engine turns on. Everything before was them pushing. Everything after, if they stay invested, is the math beginning to push back. The whole story of building wealth compresses into one idea you can hold in your hand. The first 100,000 is hard because you're doing it almost entirely alone. After that, your money starts doing it with you. That's not a secret, but most people never stay long enough to feel it. So wherever you are right now, early in the climb, somewhere in the middle, or staring at a balance that feels impossibly far from the threshold, know this. The difficulty you're feeling is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're still in the hardest part. The part where the math hasn't caught up to the effort yet. But it will. The math always catches up. And when it does, it doesn't arrive quietly.